Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gregg, and I'm a financial mediator and business valuation expert in St. Louis, Missouri. And today I'm speaking to Victoria Kirilloff. And we're talking about signs your spouse is hiding money and how to prove it and all of these good things today. But I want to tell you a little bit about Victoria because her and I both operate in the same space of forensics and business and finance, but she also has some firsthand divorce experience that she really started to realize it shouldn't destroy you financially or emotionally. So, after a decade of being financially entangled in a relationship that was abusive, she did what any financial analyst would do. She built her way out. She used her background in financial analysis. She created what became the first global settlement proposal and divorce report, a tool so effective it helped her and her partner reach a peaceful separation without tearing everything apart. So that kind of lit a spark in her, and she started to use financial clarity to find her own way out, but also to help others, which is a lot of what we're all about right now. She is a certified divorce financial analyst and the founder of Divorce Analytics. And this is a firm dedicated to making the financial side of divorce a little bit more transparent, fair, and maybe even empowering. I really like speaking to her. She has a gift for transforming, life's chaotic moments into something that you can actually navigate with confidence. She believes wholeheartedly that your best chapter doesn't end at divorce. In fact, it might just be the beginning. So, welcome, Victoria. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you for having me, Melissa. I am excited to be here.
So you got involved with this. Now you have an extensive background, and we'll probably talk more about it at the end of this podcast when everybody gets to know you even more. But a lot of what got you involved, like you were already a financial analyst, right? You were already kind of working in business from a young age, but then you went through this divorce, and some of the tactics that were used, some of the manipulation that was used, you started to realize you could kind of use your knowledge and power for good, and that helped you create this divorce analytics and really focus on forensics, which is what we're going to be talking today. But give us a little bit more from your take about, why this is important to you, or, why you're really dedicated in the divorce space, because not everybody likes divorce. They kind of see it as, difficult and everybody's crying, but we have to look at it from an analytical standpoint. And I love some of your viewpoints. So give us a little taste of Victoria.
Absolutely. So I am 39 now, but when I was facing uncoupling from Voldemort, I was at the end of my 20s. I had been with him for 10 years, and I was so emotionally entangled, and our relationship had turned very abusive, and it was so challenging to figure out not only the emotions of it, but how I was going to navigate the financial transition. And unfortunately, I realized there was no white knight coming to my rescue. My dad, he is the giant of the shoulders I am standing upon, he suffered a catastrophic stroke when I was 25, and he had always been preparing me for that day when he would no longer be able to be that Russian gorilla in the room. And so he always had a saying. He was a Russian nuclear engineer that worked for CIA. So Papa was like, brilliant. And he was so mathematically minded, but he had that little extra chutzpah and was able to actually not only do the numbers, but communicate them as well. And so I grew up at his knee, watching him navigate his engineers, the executives, and his clients by going back to the facts of the matter. And he was able to pull together all of these unique minds who really didn't care for one another by focusing on a shared vision and a shared set of definitions. he had a saying, and it was, if it cannot be expressed in numbers, it cannot be expressed at all. And so we fast forward to my relationship failing with Voldemort, and the emotions were just so heavy. Every time I tried to think about how I got to be in this position, I just got depressed and I could not take action. And without my dad there to lean on, I had to go back to those words that were etched on my heart. And one day I had enough. There was a pretty bad fight, and I realized, like, oh, damn, like, this is happening. Like, this is serious. If I do not get out, I'm going to end up either in a jumpsuit or in a box. And I'm a little Russian. I'm the daughter of a Russian nuclear engineer. I'm nobody's bitch. So it was really important that I start planning my way out. And that's when Divorce Analytics was really born. I sat at our table figuring out the cash flow transition. I loved our house, but keeping it was going to be an albatross around my neck. And I was really able to weed through all of my internal opposition to navigating this by focusing on the money. And I put together a documentation-based report, just like my old man taught me. And I was able, for the first time in years, have a productive conversation with Voldemort. And it was actually a very amicable uncoupling to a very tumultuous relationship. And I realized that, wow, like, not only was I able to avoid attorneys, I was able to get myself out without further harm. And I realized that I could be doing this for other people. I started off as a financial advisor. And while there is, some people are motivated by achieving another comma for their clients, I wanted to do something more meaningful that had a bigger impetus, because divorce is the biggest financial transition of your life. And unless you are looking through the financial lens, it is so easy to get divorce decision fatigue and to make decisions that are out of alignment with your bigger goals.
Well, and I think you bring up a lot of good points because, regardless of the relationship that you are in, you get to this point where you have to start to separate your stuff. And, a lot of forensics is pattern recognition. A lot of the financial details are just putting it, pulling the documents together, starting to take a look and face maybe the financial reality of the situation and what would be a handful of good outcomes, because there really aren't a million ways to split your assets in some reasonable fashion. But I think that both people are always scared of the unknown. And so they hire attorneys, then the attorneys start to move you further apart. Whereas if you start to look at these documents, and, we do encourage people to plan in the dark. We do encourage them to start to pull together some of these documents, start to look for some of the clues, start to analyze, what are the patterns that we see? Because everybody, I'm sure you look through as many bank statements as I do, but we're methodical humans, right? We start to do things in a very pattern basis. But like, if you were to go back and start again, like where would you have started? Like collecting documents, taking a look at banks, like where do you start even as an analyst in trying to figure out the result? Because I like to start with the end in mind and then back into
Yes.
how are we going to accomplish that? But like, where do you start when you look at some complex, forensic or complex, even emotional financial picture?
So you literally took the words right out of my mouth. You have to begin with an end in mind. This is going to literally, you're going to lose 20 IQ points as you navigate a divorce. And so it is so important to get in alignment with your divorce team before you begin. Because a lot of people, they have unrealistic expectations for what the divorce process is going to get for them. This is unfortunately not really set up for emotional closure or reconciliation. By the time you involve divorce professionals, this is business through and through. And so part of my job is sitting together with the client and making sure that they're aware, that first off, we define what their values are and how they would like to conduct themselves throughout this divorce, but also what their long-term financial objectives are and how reasonable it is that we are going to be able to deliver an outcome on that level. And so, as always, there are no guarantees in divorce. So you really have to be mindful with how this is, with what everyone thinks that they're going to be achieving out of this. So after we have that conversation, that's when we start to dig into the weeds. And I have a 4-page document checklist. And so not everybody is going to have everything on that. But really, depending on the type of divorce that you have, we have to figure out the different financial claims. Generally, there's going to be property division and spousal support. If there's kids involved, throw child support in there too. For certain cases, there's the equalization of marital waste claims. And so we really, depending on what that scope is, we then dive into gathering those documents.
Well, I think it's interesting because, when we're looking at property division and spousal support, a lot of the income movement. So when cash is withdrawn, because a lot of when you're looking for hidden money, you're looking for cash withdrawals, you're looking for transfers to accounts that have not been disclosed or that you didn't know about. But a lot of times you're not going to know about a lot of the financial picture in general. So I think when people are initially coming to us, they're saying, well, can you search a database and figure out where all of these hidden accounts are? Can you trace down every dollar that was spent on this outside relationship? Like, I want to know how much is missing. And I think sometimes that's probably where your beginning part is really important, of scoping the project and saying, okay, and setting expectations on that. These, like, we're not miracle workers, right? So you have to kind of have documents to trace. You have to have, follow the money in some kind of perspective. But a lot of this cash flow is going to result in some adjustment to spousal alimony or maintenance, right? And marital waste. But at the beginning, what are you pulling these documents together? What conversations are you having with somebody that's like, oh, they've had outside relationships, and I know they've moved money, and I know they're hiding things in another country. Like, where are you kind of dialing them back a little bit and saying, okay, what are the signs you should really be looking for, right?
Yeah. So each type of marital waste claim has different nuances to it. And so when you are looking at an extramarital affairs claim, this is one of the harder claims to actually make because they can justify the expenses easily. We've identified that they had a very extravagant night out on Valentine's Day and they weren't with their spouse. Well, we need to ask more questions around this. And there, unfortunately, is no divorce police. And there are ways for us to highlight transactions, but it takes more chutzpah and documentation to actually get that converted into a successful claim. So when you are looking at extramarital affairs analysis, you really need to figure out, like, were they, how long has this been going on? And then anything past, or anything that's past the date of separation, that becomes different territory. And that is not, unless they are using marital funds, that then is funded with their post-divorce expenses, which are generally considered separate property. So that is not a part of the analysis. And what will sometimes happen is that the end of the relationship, or the beginning rather of the relationship, is a little murky on their next relationship. And they will have spent a lot of money wining and dining this person, and the spouse will want full reconciliation of that. However, if it's after that post-divorce line, then unfortunately it cannot be equalized. So there's just a lot of, building out the documentation, but then you have to go through and ask additional questions, and just know that, if you're getting like 75 to 80% of your total, questioned amount, is that if that is a successful claim, that's pretty good. But I often point people to, there's a very famous case in California, the Donald and Shelley Sterling case, where the husband was spending like $5 million on Vanessa, which they owned the Clippers, so it's fairly common for everybody to kind of have their finger on the celebrity gossip in LA. But essentially, Shelley had purported that her husband had spent the $5 million, but they were only able to really get all of the documentation in place for like half of that. And so, that's a big deviation. So you just really have to be mindful that even though you can, ascertain that your spouse has been having extramarital affairs, actually proving that and, preventing them from sneaking out the back door is a whole different part of this process.
Well, and I think that a lot of times that's why a focus, when you brought up why we're doing some of this forensics, it can be just to split the property in a certain way. It could just be to show that there's extra cash for spousal support. Like those are tangible results that could come from, doing some forensic investigation, because even marital waste, you might get 50% of it back, right? And then, like you're talking about a lot of California issues, which is after the date of separation or divorce or filing, or, whatever you earn after that is going to be yours, right? So you can go blow it. You can go spend it on whatever bad things that you want to. So I think it's really important for people to understand when you're hiring a professional that you're asking them, like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to have some closure around what their spending was? Are we trying to get more alimony, more maintenance, more property in some capacity? Now, when you get started on your work, do you kind of go through like a certain number of documents or a certain year, and then do you kind of revisit back with the client after you make some initial kind of assessment, if you will?
Yeah. So obviously, we're constantly asking clients, like, what do you know? Because a common theme is people think that, especially in high net worth cases, there's a deviation of labor where the financially savvy spouse took care of the family's finances and the non-financially savvy spouse managed the human assets in the relationship. And now that they're navigating the divorce, there's that equalization of like knowledge base. And oftentimes people think that they don't know anything, but they have so much information. And so, generally where we like to begin with their input is 3 to 5 years, right? Especially if there has been a history of either gambling, extramarital affairs, or whatever it is, pick their poison. Or if they had a significant business deal and they started moving money out of the country after that, right? We just are always taking in that client's input so we can be very exacting, because you don't want to go back 20 years if you could only go back 3. There's a lot of, ways to just get out ahead of this by asking the right questions in the early phase.
Well, and I think that's important because a lot of times when we're going through the bank statements and I'm like, I don't know, did you guys always go to these restaurants? And like somebody can look and say, oh, no, we never went to that location, or we never went to that, restaurant and things like that. But even if we dial it back a little bit more, like 3 to 5 years of data is a lot of it, like a lot of information. Like, I don't think people understand. We use our debit cards, we use our credit cards for like every little tiny transaction, right? So you could have hundreds of transactions in a month. You could have several different cards. You could have several different accounts. Like, and a lot of forensic people are going in and they're having somebody, hand, there's not really easy ways to take like PDFs and transfer them into Excel files. You're going to do like all this work. So they're like, "Oh, we'll just have people enter the data." Now, what interests me about what you do is you use some technology and some tools that I think, it might be important for you to ask your forensic expert, like if they're using some of these tools, because these are not cheap technologies that are available and not everybody's using. So talk to us a little bit about how you take mass amounts of data, and because this is not how we are doing it. Like, this is a game changer, I think.
Well, I'm so glad that you asked because I am a big believer in using technology, right? We live in the 21st century, therefore your business practices and your analytical methodologies of building a report need to be living in this realm. So what I have partnered with, it's a company called validate.com. They are literally like head and shoulders above any other type of forensic analysis software on the market. I have checked, I am constantly looking. But what their claim to fame is one of the founders was actually on the federal prosecuting team to capture Bernie Madoff. And they had to crunch all of this data. Can you imagine? Like, with
Wow.
my
Okay.
cases, I think like the tallest stack of documents I ever had was like 3 feet. Well, Bernie Madoff's team had reams, piles up to the sky that they had to crunch. And one of the founders, he was like, there has to be a better way. And out of that experience was birthed Validate. And this is like so amazing because I have gone from having to pay people to enter the data or do it myself because you have to build the documentation trail. Like, divorce is like any other lawsuit, and it is, claim and documentation, that is how this works. And if you are the person making the claim, you have to have the documentation to back it up. And when you are asking for an unequal split of the assets or reimbursement of a marital waste claim, this is not generally done. And so you need to be preparing and presenting the case information to get everybody on board. So with that, Validate enables me to, turn what used to be hundreds of hours, if not weeks or months of just desk monkey work of entering the data into something that I'm able to upload the files. It's fantastic because it actually will give you a date analysis. And so it will flag any account statements that are duplicated, have not been provided. So that is a huge time saver right then and there. But most amazingly, it has built out. So you're able to hit an analyze button. Takes a few hours, but that information becomes digitized. You then go in and double check it, obviously, but it enables you, it highlights a lot of the stuff that I would do if I had to do it by hand. So it highlights any, transfers out, any large or uneven transfers. If it's transferred through the accounts that we have access to, it pulls that out and it identifies those specific accounts that we only see outflows or maybe inflows coming into. So it gives us a good base to then ask more questions or to start preparing a claim.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the manipulation with a spouse who doesn't want you to find things is to dump a ton of data on you and a ton of documents, and then give it to you in a way that you the amount of time that you can spend just sorting the information, just checking to make sure you have all of the statements, which again, if you're going to use this information in court, like that's the place that they're going to come and hit you. Oh, well, you didn't have everything. You don't have a list of these documents. So like really using this data in court is going to require you to know what you have, to know how it was analyzed, but at the end of the day, we've had cases where, 12,000 documents and it came down to one piece of information, one statement, or like that's what they're doing to you to make it so that you don't get it. So if you don't get to that space very quickly, but then you come in and the analysis is really, like getting the documents all
Oh,
into a
yeah.
cohesive pattern, like that's step one. Now we have to go and analyze it. What's some of your process to go through and take a look at it? Because it still has to impact something, right? It still has to have some impact at the end game.
Yeah. So, um, before I answer that question, I have to say one of my favorite little antidotes is that I was working on a court-ordered mediation case, which a lot of people don't realize that is different than when two parties elect to go to mediation. So court-ordered mediation generally, they're going to have more aggressive attorneys, and you could think of these as like semi-hostile negotiations under the guise of mediation. And so this case it was just a perfect example of validate coming through. And so the husband had delayed. This divorce had been going on for 5 years, and I was brought on board within the last 6 months of it. And so he had pulled every stall tactic in the book. And then at the 11th hour, about 3 days before mediation was supposed to commence, he gave us I think it was like 15,000 pages of information to sort through. And so their strategy was obviously, we complied and they weren't able to do the analysis in time. So it's on them. Well, little did they know Victoria was in the background with her validate. And so I was able to, I had to burn the midnight oil, but we were able to actually nail that, jerk to the wall. And it did come down to, a few documents that what we were really looking for. So it's just a wonderful way to not only save clients money, but also to like remove a lot of the human error and to deal with really tight deadlines that can't really be avoided. If she would have gone back to the or her attorney would have said, hey, we need to reschedule mediation. Well, that would have been painted as if she was delaying, it wouldn't be just so many narratives get woven in divorce. And this was completely like a Hail Mary move where we were able to show up not only with questions about his bad behavior, but we were able to get to your next question to put it into practice, into like actual to get it into the divorce report. So to take a step back, one of the first things that you do in a divorce is determine the total marital estate value. So, after all of the debts have been equalized, what is the total assets remaining? And then you determine, depending on what state you're in, if it's an equitable distribution, which uses the horrible F word in divorce, what's fair, which generally, is subjective, or a community property division, which is essentially a 50-50 analysis. So regardless of what state model that you're in, begin at 50%, and then you start making adjustments. And so something that I have seen rise in my practice are, the liquidation of assets due to gambling addictions from, all of those, sport things. I'm sorry. My dad was a nuclear engineer. I didn't watch football on the weekend. I have the worst sport analogies. But what has happened, and it's truly sad, is that one spouse has completely depleted the marital or their retirement accounts, chasing that gambling addiction. And now the spouse has found out about it and they're like, holy cow, the only thing that is left are my assets and our house. And so now they're going through the divorce and they are like, okay, it's time to determine the total marital estate value. However, it's like $1 million less because those retirement accounts were liquidated due to gambling. So now where I come in is I'm like, okay, we need to mathematically demonstrate that the gambler essentially took his assets as a pre-marital or as a pre-divorce distribution. And so he's already gotten his. And so now we award based off of that what the other client should get. So you really have to build out that documented value so then you could start making adjustments from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one piece of the negotiation that people don't understand. Like if money has been depleted, if it has gone away, because we also see a lot of cryptocurrency gambling happening, which is one of the schemes that I think is the most fascinating because there's so much in cryptocurrency that is hidden, if you will, or like should be disclosed, but is, there's ways to prevent it. And then when you're using it for gambling purposes or even very lucrative investments, if you will, I think that when it comes right down to it, you're looking not necessarily for an unequal division of the property. You're looking for them to say, oh, you already had that $1 million. So I want $1 million of our tangible assets. And that's a huge piece of this negotiation. Now, one thing that you talked about, which I think is why this is a little bit of a game changer, is that these tactics are always going to be done so that you don't have enough time to utilize the data, right? You might be able to pick out, oh, here's 5 big transfers for a couple $100,000. But if you're able to look at all the data very quickly, it's like, oh no, it wasn't a couple 100,000. It was millions over time. It's
Yeah.
just that, and this, like we looked into, because after you talked about this program, I looked into it and I was like, you know what? We have to really be doing forensics on a daily basis to have this make sense. And that's why I wanted to reach out to you because I was like, this is really what most forensic people need to be doing is how do you shorten the time to get the data in a readable fashion, but still protect it for the trial or for even presenting it because we're not presenting to big dummies. Like we're presenting to people who have multi-million dollar companies who have cash flow coming in and out and going everywhere. And like there's a method to their madness. It's just that not everybody understands the madness, right? And so cutting through it, I think is really important that you were talking about and how it affects the overall balance sheet. Like that's still, like you don't want to spend $50,000 on a forensic to find $10,000 of missing money. Like you have to know that there's something bigger happening. But the amount of time, effort, and knowledge that you've put in to making yourself more efficient is also a costly endeavor. Like this is why not all forensics are going to have access to this type of technology. And we're not just talking about AI, right? Like AI is one thing. This is data analytics that, like a long time ago, there used to be other database and they always were like database scrubbers, right? You still had to have the information in some sort of Excel file, but they're not going to give you that. They're going to give you it in PDF. Like if I really want to be a jerk, I'm going to rescan a PDF, which is going to be even harder for you to OCR or, look at in some capacity. Like, and these people are going to do this. So you have to have very quick ways of operating or even working with a professional that is willing to in 30 days, because most people would just say nope, not possible, not possible at the end of the day, right? So anyway, I'm just trying to. Victoria's amazing if you're not getting the drift. But let's go back to how it affects some property division or spousal support, because the spousal support we haven't quite talked about, because spousal support is going to be based on income, and income from a business is one
Yes.
thing. Like, you can do a lot of manipulation in a business, but just in general they might be like, oh, I'm poor, I'm broke, I used to have that money, but now I don't see nothing, it's all gone. How are you dealing with some of those aspects of spousal support as well?
Yeah, so in those situations, my favorite thing to do is to do a historical analysis to really trace the money, right? And every situation is unique. So most of my cases, I would say, are high net worth or high income. And so, as I said earlier, most spouses know more than what they think. They just have been gaslit, or they are insecure because the other person always took care of the money. And when they start writing things down, all sorts of information bubbles to the surface. And so in these situations, it is so important to have open communication with your team and to be constantly negotiating and navigating this together. Because at the end of the day, it really comes down to building out the documentation and then figuring out how it works. And so in the case of spousal support, you have to figure out the historical income, but more importantly, like, a lot of people aren't aware that there's other ways to get paid than a W-2. So a case that I recently had, the husband converted the business into an S corp, and so he was just giving the W-2s. And he was like, oh, I am, here's my W-2 income. And I flagged it to the attorney. I'm like, why does he keep saying W-2? And I did some deep digging and I realized, oh, homeboy has an S corp up his sleeve. This is not like he's not an employee. He is actually the business owner. And so it really came down to looking at his K1s, all those distributions he was taking, and building out his total income picture. Another case that I had just worked on, a lot of investment bankers, they did well, up until 2008, and there's been a change in the market. And so this individual, he was making $5 million a year, and then due to the market shifting, it had, he was only making one. So sad for him. Well, he continued supporting the family in that $5 million lifestyle. And when he then went to get a divorce, his wife was like, well, he only makes, $1 million. And it wasn't until I went through the tax returns, I'm like, oh no, honey, like, he has literally been liquidating your assets for the last, gosh, like 12 years. And, you're actually, his total income available for support is close to $2.5 million. So there's just so much that has to be, like, each step of spousal support has a lot of nuance. And this is like one of my favorite things to do. So I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. But when you are looking at spousal support now, depending on the state that you're in, it's going to vary. But for the most part, it comes down to a budgetary analysis. And there's pretty much four main factors. The first is your marital standard of living. The second is your post-divorce cost of living and your overall financial need. The third is the payor's income available for support. And the fourth is the recipient's earning capacity. So what this looks like is really a giant budgetary exercise where you figure out the total lifestyle and what each person's reasonable, staying in line with that marital standard of living, what's their post-divorce reality, and then plugging in the total income and what the earning capacity is. And so with that, we've already kind of addressed the total income available for support, but it is really worth it, especially if your spouse is a business owner. you have to then add in something called a prerequisite. And so, AKA a business perk. This is a business paid personal expense. So, for example, my business pays my health insurance and my cell phone, my car. So, if I ever got divorced, it would not just be my W-2 income with my distributions, it would also be those perquisites added in. So there's just a lot of little refinements that you have to go through. And that's where having the right team in place that knows how to go through the documents, to ask the right questions, to use your money effectively, right? Because this is not a cheap adventure to go on, but you need to be spending money in a very judicious way that actually supports that overall objective of what is the end goal.
Well, and I think that this is where sometimes couples or individuals are going to be like, well, shouldn't my financial advisor or my CPA or, my uncle who's invested our money for 5 years be able to help us out? And in some aspects, I like to include those people if there's going to be a taxable event. Like if they're going to write your like put together your tax return, then yes, we want to know what their implication is. Or if they're going to invest your money and like what is your rate of return in the future? Yes. But I think if you're trying to figure out how you're going to prove some of this in court or even prove it up in mediation, which is kind of like mock trial, if you will, then you really have to work with somebody who is going to look at this from a divorce lens, whether that's a CDFA or whether that's a business valuation expert that also does it. Sometimes people will call these lifestyle analyses. However, you want to frame it up, it has to be facing reality in some aspect and working with somebody who forces you to face the reality of, we had a tax return where the person claimed that they were making $10,000 a year. Their mortgage was $10,000 a month, right? Well, come to find out, the K1 had distributions. The businesses were obviously running a lot of expenses through the business. But, instead of looking at this like, oh my gosh, there's so much here, it takes a more balanced brain to come in and be like, hey, I don't know what it is, but we have to do these steps so that we can understand what the true picture is, right? And not setting an expectation for somebody to say, oh, well, if they made $5 million in the past, then you're going to get $20,000, $30,000 a month of alimony easy. Work with people that are going to take a holistic approach and say, okay, let's pull the right people in. Let's look at these different factors, but also like I've had doctors that have stayed at home with the kids. You're going to have a spouse that says, hey, you could still be a doctor. You could still be a nurse practitioner, and so I think having some idea of sort of best case, worst case, like, are you running a lot of different scenarios so that somebody can be like, okay, what happens if, we find out that there's additional income here? Or what's your process to kind of make them have a better clarity around the financial picture when negotiating?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite things to do, Melissa. What we do is we begin with building out different proposals based off of the property division and how spousal support will be paid. It is very common in long-term marriages to determine a lump sum or present value figure of the spousal support payments and then have that be paid from the actual property division. And so let's just, for simplicity's sake, we'll say property division A is when there's a lump sum payout, and property division B is when it's paid on a monthly basis. And then from that point, I like my clients to think about 3 different levels of proposal. The first is their dream scenario if they got everything they wanted, knowing that this is probably and very unlikely to occur. The second is we identify areas of compromise and how to build a win-win outcome. Because in divorce, winning is really coming in third place. Nobody should be in first, nobody should be in fifth, and certainly not seventh, right? It needs to be an equal balance. And finally, you determine the third and final level, which is their bottom dollar. It is really, I think, when you know your bottom line, and let's say you're making a spousal request for $25,000 a month. In actuality, you know that you can get by with significant lifestyle changes on 17. And so for going into negotiation, you absolutely know that you can't accept anything less than 18 or whatever that number is to make you feel comfortable. So it's through that empowered and practical application lens that you're able to then make those data-driven decisions in negotiation and really avoid decision fatigue, because that sets in, especially if you have been wanting a divorce for a long time. By the time you actually get to a negotiation, it can be years. That's not the goal, right? We would like it to be a lot quicker, but you really, as we have said earlier, you have to begin this process with an end in mind and with professionals helping you come to terms with reasonable expectations for the outcome.
Now, what are some, and I completely agree. And I actually take it one step further and tell people never to tell anybody their bottom line, because then, everybody's going to negotiate straight there, obviously. But, getting back to some of the forensics, like what are some of the things that you've seen recently that have been kind of creative, maybe ways of either moving money, hiding money, or I would say a lot of times people think that their spouses are very smart and devious, and there's always a trail. Like they're hiding it from you. It doesn't mean that or maybe the IRS, but they're not like trying to like do criminal activity. But what have you seen is some things that people should be mindful about or think about? Because it's not logical to think that your spouse is like can somehow transfer millions of dollars to an account in the Bahamas, right? There's actual like technically ways to do that, but it's not as easy as people think. What have you seen that really are realistic ways that people are hiding money, transferring money, trying to get around alimony, trying to get around property divisions, which is really what they're trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm. So a common tactic that I've seen is they just have an additional investment account at a separate firm that, like, maybe you guys use Fidelity for everything, and then they have an RBC outside of that. Another common thing that I see all the time these days is people moving money to their cryptocurrency accounts. And so oftentimes cryptocurrency just doesn't get thought of. I don't know why. It's like a huge market. There is a big public, push for more crypto in the world, or NFTs, some of those weird tokens that the internet has created, right? These are great stores of wealth if you're trying to, hide assets during a divorce. Because at the end of the day, like an NFT is like a digital painting, and somebody's like, what do you mean that's $1 million? So, oftentimes this inadvertently gets left off of the financial disclosure because someone forgot, or they were, really, they were hoping that you wouldn't ask questions. So there is always a paper trail, and you just have to gather the account statements and start processing them and asking questions. But gone are the days, as you mentioned, Melissa. It's not easy to go get a Cayman bank account and start siphoning money out overseas. And even now, there's a $10,000 limit when you leave the country on how much cash you can bring in or bring out. So it really comes down to getting the documents and sourcing it. But as I've seen, a lot of these people think that their tactics are new, but this is tried and true manipulation and financial abuse. It's pretty easy once you've been doing this for a while to, recognize the red flags and the client's communication patterns and how they talk about the family financial narratives. And then, you look at the bank account statements and you're like, okay, well, I had a guy that he was a jeweler and he was taking in a lot of cash. And so in this case, this guy had been hiding cash in like kind of like mob style in the floorboards of the house. And so, you know, the wife was aware of this and she just thought it was, he was hiding in one area and we had to go through the entire house and actually look under the floorboards. So, gone are those days though. This guy had a lot of cash coming in, so it worked. But most of the time, people don't even use cash these days. So it comes down to following that digital asset trail.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that one of the things that I've seen is that people will take separate money. So this is another, like if they had an inheritance or they had some sort of separate money that comes in, and a lot of high net worth people have great estate planners. They've figured out how to keep that money separate, and then if they do anything, they may purchase like gold bars or artwork, or NFTs would be like a more digital kind of process, but they're actually purchasing assets that still maintain that separateness. I mean, we had a classic case where the wife wanted the house in the divorce, and the house was actually in a trust that the son never owned. And like it was just assumed that it was his house, but he had never paid one single dime. The family trust had paid all the taxes, all of the expenses, every single thing that had happened to that house. Now, again, a lot of times just allowing somebody to pay like kind of take care of the finances is how we've gotten ourselves into these situations. But, understanding that there could be piles of money somewhere, but was that derived from marital efforts? Was that derived from separate assets? Is also going to be some of the tracing. And I don't know if you see quite a bit of kind of this separate asset tracing, because it could be backed by a prenup. We've seen some really exhaustive prenups right now that are like, you get no income, you get no assets, you get no anything. And people are protecting. So it looks like a lifestyle that you're living, but you have to do some due diligence to understand, is that going to be divisible in court? And I think that that's also sometimes an aspect. Like you can chase all the money you want, but is there some level of separateness to that asset? And I don't know if you see some cases like that as well.
Oh, yeah, that is a really good point because oftentimes, as you've noted, the trust pays for the house. And oftentimes, these are conversations that are not had. It's just assumed that all of this is being supported with those marital dollars. So a lot of the time in divorce, there's that financial reckoning where you kind of thought you knew somebody or you thought you knew your finances and come to realize there's a completely, there's almost a third person in your financial relationship.
Yeah. Well, and the final thing that I'll note about businesses is that everybody wants to be a successful business owner. So you have family money or you have this beautiful $1 million home, and I'm successful at business. What I don't think people understand is that a lot of businesses are financed by debt. And so,
Yes.
we went through even COVID where people got huge amounts of loans and huge amounts of debt that was kind of given to them during that time period. But, I've never met a business owner that didn't believe that their business was worth way more than I ever valued it until they got divorced. But for the most part, I think we have this perception of success. And, sometimes that working with somebody who really crunches the numbers is going to expose that maybe this person said that there was a lot of money coming in and they spent as if a lot of money was coming in, but the financial reality may not live up to that. So, what happens when you have to kind of give somebody a bad kind of analysis, like a financial reality check in some capacity? Like, does that happen very often, or are you always finding the money?
No, there's a lot of unfortunate events that I have to convey during my meetings with clients. And that's really where I like to lean on having a divorce coach. I'm a big proponent of a team divorce process. I'm a believer that divorce has an emotional, social, financial, and legal phase. And really, it takes like similar to having a village raise a child, you need a village that's skilled to lead you through each phase so you're getting a high quality experience. You work with a divorce coach for the emotional and social stuff. You build your financial team to handle the financial considerations like Melissa and I. And then finally you have an attorney that comes in at the very, end or beginning, right, to give you input. But their role should be relatively limited and based off of what you need to understand legally and how to support you in negotiation. Where I see a lot of attorneys get over their skis is they have paralegals that build out their financial information, and at the end of the day, paralegals have not got the same amount of training compared to Melissa or I. And this is the biggest financial transition of your life. And to have a paralegal build out your proposal, you are just going to be skipping over a lot of things that an expert would have recognized. And so the attorney has an important role to play. I am no means by trying to, denigrate them, but you have to really build it out so you are working with the right professional at the right time, so you're getting the best quality of information. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that you're going to go to your attorney to cry and talk about the house and asking if you can afford it. And they're going to bill you at whatever their hourly rate is to give you a tissue and to say, we'll talk about it later, or we'll figure it out, down the road. But if you are
Wow.
waiting to your date of mediation to understand the impact of the finances, that is a sure way to have a horrible quality divorce experience that is, potentially even more traumatic than the divorce itself from your partner.
Yeah. And I think to kind of tie it up for this conversation, which again, we plan on having Victoria back to talk more, but we wanted to kind of cover big picture. At the end of the day, when you're putting together your financial disclosures at the beginning of the divorce, this is a really big piece of the puzzle of understanding, am I okay with this 50-50 split, right? If right now we've identified the assets and they provide their financial disclosure and you provide your financial disclosure, could we split this 50-50 and could I be okay with it? If there's a business valuation, obviously you're going to call us and get a preliminary valuation, which we do at very low cost that, kind of gets you to know the number to try to settle it. But then you have to say, okay, is there missing assets? Was there some sort of addiction issue, which could be gambling, drinking, drugs, women, any of those things that have removed some money over time? Were there any cash indicators of like missing assets or transfers to assets that have not been disclosed? At that point, it would be beneficial to bring in somebody, because what we're trying to do is at least at a minimum which is why we like Victoria's process, is to start to see, hey, are any of these rabbit holes the ones we need to go down to prove out that there should be more assets so that we can split the known assets at a different capacity? Because that is the ultimate goal, is to get to a settlement a lot faster, like within 6 months, okay, from filing, not a year, not 18 months. If you're anywhere in that space, I think you have to talk to the right people, but also not all valuation people and forensic people are the same. Not all of them want to find a more economical way of looking at things or a more efficient way of analyzing the data. So it's really going to be in your best interest, even if you have tons of money, to not necessarily chase bad money with good. You know, like you might think, oh my gosh, I think he's hidden tons of money. If Victoria doesn't see it, then you might not want to go down that rabbit hole. You might want to go a different route that she identifies in analyzing the data. I'm like, oh, you know what? There's this other route that might actually equal more results. And that's what you want to have, is somebody that's more strategic in their outlook as opposed to just methodical, like, nope, we got to check the boxes. We got to go through all 10 years of data. And if we don't and spend $50,000, then you're not going to have an answer. You have to find people that can get to the answers at the stages that you're at. And then you decide, because a lot of times a client might decide, okay, I want to go further. I want to know everything about that, even if it costs me this amount. Victoria's perfectly happy to go do that process. And, you know, a lot of what we talk about is just start to look at some of your documents to see if any of these red flags exist, to see if any of these, like, oh, yep, there's a lot of cash withdrawals. Oh, yep, there's a lot of unknown accounts or PayPal or Venmo or loans or, you know, discretionary spending. You have to put a wrapper on it to put a dollar amount on it. And that's where an expert comes in. So Victoria, tell us a little bit more about, like, how somebody, I'm going to show ways that they could reach out to you. You know, what are typical things that people reach out for you for, these certain analyses that we've talked about? And, you know, how does somebody get started in the process? Like, how do they know it's worth it to hire somebody like you, right?
Absolutely. So I really help people determine the total marital estate value. So what is actually going to be divided for the property division. And then we roll into spousal support. Maximization is one of my favorite things to do, but then also dissipation of marital asset claims. I help people with straightforward assets, but I really enjoy those complex estates. And I do offer free 30-minute consultations that are never 30 minutes. But, you know, my goal during that call is to start peeling back the onion and really identify the scope of engagement and areas that we need to start diving into. So how I have structured my firm is that, you know, if you are more of that DIYer, I am happy to, you know, provide that higher level analysis if you can do the base. Conversely, I have clients that they want it all done for them, and I'm happy to provide that level of support. But at the end of the day, my goal is to create that global settlement proposal, because your divorce is, chances are it's going to be negotiated without you in the room. And unless you are putting everything down on paper and methodically laying it out and determining what rabbit hole is going to get you the best possible outcome, you know, that's really where the magic happens, and you're able to transform this into a punishment process, into one that is truly transformative and is going to help you expand and grow. Because this is not the end of the world. It's going to feel like it, because literally, like, you are going through those 4 phases, right? Your emotions are, you know, upended. Your social activities are disrupted, your finances are up in the air, and you're now having to deal with attorneys and figure out all of this. It's very unsettling. And when you have financial guidance, that's actually when you're able to sleep well at night and to show up to mediation or litigation, whatever it is, and rock it out. And so the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, divorceanalytics.com. You can schedule a consultation there, or drop me an email at hello@mywealthanalytics.com.
Yeah. And what I will say is that, a lot of times your lawyer is going to want to work with like their own forensic people or valuation people in their area. Realistically, financial professionals can work around the country. We can work in any state. You need to find the
Mhm.
right people for your right situation and ask those other people, like, are you using any sort of data analytic tools? Oh, no, we're entering all the data. Are you can I review certain things with you? Oh, no, we do all the work. Well, what am I going to get for $5,000? What am I going to get for $10,000? Like, ask them some of these questions so that you don't get into a situation where you have hired people and you're already down that rabbit hole and you can't now extract from it. Worst case, also get a second opinion. If you think you've hired somebody and they haven't really taken a look at the things that you are concerning to you, which is like one of the first steps that we take is like, okay, what are your biggest priorities, right? Then you might need a second opinion. Don't ever be concerned about reaching out to somebody who could give you clarity if you haven't had clarity and you've been in the process for a long time. So I just think that, like we usually specialize when these things involve a business valuation. Not always do they involve a business. So, if you want some resources, find people that can give you some of those other realms. Now, Victoria's got a lot of experience in California. We've done a lot of cases in California. But again, a lot of times we just, I think we're working in like half of the states at this point.
Mhm.
Anybody can bone up on some of the state specific rules. They're actually not that difficult, okay, from a financial aspect. More so, you want somebody that's got the analytical and the strategic, like, how are these numbers going to play into your settlement? And so, again, Victoria is a CDFA, which a lot of times people want to find. She's also trained in mediation. I think that's an important thing because even if you're not in mediation, everything is being negotiated, everything is being mediated in some fashion. So, any other things that you think people should pay attention to or do at this point? And then we'll kind of shut it down.
Yeah. If I can leave you guys with one last bit of advice, do not make the mistake of hiring an attorney and thinking that they have it covered, right? They have a full caseload. They are probably a little desensitized to family law, and your divorce is going to mean the most to you. And it's by the time you are hiring your divorce team that you need to really understand what's going on and start guiding the attorney through that lens of financial analysis because you're going to have to live with the settlement. No one else is. And if something doesn't get handled properly, you're out on you end up holding the short end of the stick. So you lean into this process, and that's again where a divorce coach can be so instrumental because they're going to help you with the overall operational management. But building out your team, it might sound counterintuitive, but it is truly the best way to have the lowest cost option and highest quality outcome.
I love that. Perfectly said. So we thank you, Victoria. We hope to have you back very soon. And we're going to talk in more depth about some of these pieces because, again, we're both very much focused in settlement and, negotiating a good ending. So we'll see you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.